I'm old enough, and especially now since I'm a parent, things like nap time, quiet time, and early bedtime are no longer punishments. They're things I look forward to. Maybe you've experienced that too. When we were kids, the threat of having to go to bed early or needing to take a nap felt like it was a punishment, felt like something that was terrible. And in adulthood, we become tired enough and maybe wise enough to know we need times of rest. There are times when I long to be able to get to go to bed early, and I've learned that I need these rhythms, not just in my day, but in my week and over the course of a long stretch of time for there to be work, for there to be rest. Well, it turns out the ancient people of Israel were given a similar kind of rhythm every week with this pattern of work and then Sabbath rest, which was a good gift and a good commandment. And then Jesus comes along and turns it inside out. That's also part of where we're headed this coming week in our session in When God Breaks the Rules. This coming Thursday, we're going to sort of do a twofer and take a look both at the stories of the commandments Vicar Natalie talked about in our most recent preview video about leprosy and how God both cared for the people to prevent and limit the spread of contagious disease, and then Jesus comes along and heals lepers by touching them and becoming one of the outcasts himself by touching the unclean in order to heal them. And we're also going to take a look at what at first might seem like a completely different random rule, but actually there's a similar kind of emotion to it. In the practice of Sabbath, God's people were given a pattern of work and of rest. There are some things you do on work days, there are some things you don't do on the rest days, on the Sabbath day. And it was intended for the life and the well-being of the whole community. The same way that as you become an adult, you realize going to bed early is not a punishment. That could be a really, really good thing and help you to be recharged to go back at it tomorrow. Ancient Israel, at its best, understood that when they had time for work and then time for rest, everybody did better. And the commandments for Sabbath were meant to be not just for me individually, but for my whole community, that anybody who I employed, any people who were on my staff, even animals that I used in my farm, all got rest one day every 7 days. And if everybody was doing it, then nobody was tempted to say, oh, well, I'm going to get a competitive edge in business and I'm going to work extra so that I'll make a little more profits than my neighbor. If everybody is taking rest, then everybody has that sense of being refreshed and renewed. It was meant to be good as a gift for all God's people. Over enough time and enough centuries, though, that sort of becomes fossilized, hardened into not just that you're supposed to rest on the Sabbath day, but that there was no flexibility at all for emergency kind of situations, right? Like, well, what if my animal falls in a ditch, and if I leave it there because it's the Sabbath day, it will die. But if I just pull it out of the ditch, it will get better and it will live. Is that okay? Or what if somebody is sick? Am I able to heal them or to offer medicine to them on the Sabbath day? Without that, would they get sicker or would they die? There were some in Jesus' day who were convinced that Sabbath was one of those practices so important, one of those rules that was so essential, there could be no wiggle room, there could be no flexibility, and that was most important was that you not do things on the Sabbath day. And Jesus comes along, and Jesus has no problem healing people when they're sick, even if it's on the Sabbath day, or curing people who have maladies or illnesses, or even casting out evil spirits, or maybe restoring sight to those who were blind, or even letting his disciples, as they're walking through a field, pluck some grain and eat it like a snack, right? Even though technically that's labor, that's harvesting grain. Now you can kind of see the tension, right? What was meant to be a good gift, the rhythm of work and rest, the idea that there's time built into our lives, not just individually, but as community, where we can rest and be renewed. That's important, that's beautiful. But it can become really, really rigid when we miss the point that the idea of Sabbath was meant to bring people more fully to life. So that, yeah, if somebody was sick, was it okay to offer them healing on the Sabbath? Jesus comes along and says, yeah, that's okay. There were plenty of respectable religious people around in Jesus' day who looked at him when he's healing somebody on the Sabbath day or letting his disciples pluck grain on the Sabbath. And they say, see, he's breaking the rule. The rule is very clear. You don't do work on the Sabbath. He's doing work. Therefore, he's a rule breaker. Jesus has this interesting, ambivalent sort of love-hate relationship with that whole notion, right? Jesus doesn't say Sabbath was a bad idea. He knows human beings need rest, and frequently in the Gospels, Jesus takes rest, time for himself, whether that's to go off and pray, simply to let his disciples rest, to talk with one another, to be together. So Jesus isn't anti-rest. But he also has this deep sense that there needs to be enough breathing room in those rhythms of work and rest, that you can deal with life in all of its messiness, that sometimes doesn't neatly fall into categories of 6 days you work and 1 day you're off. We're going to take a look both at what Jesus does in the biblical stories and maybe what this might mean in our lives as well, how it's important to keep rhythms of work and rest, but also to have enough maybe open-eyed honesty about how messy life is, to know sometimes you're going to have to do work on what would have been your day off, and sometimes you get to have a light day that would have been your work day and things are easier. And that's okay. In fact, maybe those are gifts of grace as well. And that also, when we're called to be about the work of giving people life, of bringing people more fully to life, that's what Sabbath was meant for all along. All these topics, as we take a look both at the ancient roots of Sabbath, the stories of Jesus as he breaks or bends the Sabbath, and maybe what any of that means for our lives, that's where we're headed as part 2 of this coming Thursday in our ongoing series, When God Breaks the Rules. See you then.